Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Today channel. The truth hidden 30 years was revealed on wedding day. Thomas is not Ridge's bio son. The terrible secret of Ridge is Thomas' countdown. During the time leading up to Thomas Forrester's return, Ridge Forrester will keep a terrible secret. Let's talk about all the complexities because Deacon Sharp might also think Sheila Sharp is concealing anything. He will hide a terrible secret from Taylor Hayes over with Ridge Forrester. The whole tale of Ridge becoming enmeshed in that intense time with Brooke Logan after saving her in Italy is not told by Taylor. Although it's difficult to simply leave Taylor, that experience was a true turning point for Ridge and helped him understand how much he wanted Brooke back. Ridge will conceal his desire for this Brooke reunion and the reality that he is primarily with Taylor out of duty. Ridge will continue to lie to Taylor as their wedding draws near, including during the week of August 25th to 29th. Rather than simply being truthful and releasing Taylor, Ridge will suppress his true emotions and exacerbate the situation when the truth eventually surfaces. Brooke will find it difficult to believe Ridge truly wants her as she watches him continue to pick Taylor, at least for the time being. In the upcoming episodes, Hope Logan and Carter Walton will concentrate on their own wedding preparations, but there are a number of reasons why their future might be in doubt. The bond between Daphne Rose and Hope might also be problematic. There is also the question of whether Thomas will return and if his obsession with Hope will resurface. In any event, Thomas will make his on-screen comeback in early September. We'll see if that occurs during the week of September 1st to 5th or shortly thereafter. When it comes to Thomas's homecoming and his plans for his return to Los Angeles, the clock is ticking. Without a doubt, Thomas will keep his loved ones informed on all the most recent events in his life. Following a Paris-Buckingham break, will Thomas be unmarried? Will that give Thomas hope that Hope will return? In any case, you can be sure that Thomas will defend Taylor and Ridge's future together. When Thomas notices that Brooke is pressuring Ridge to waffle back toward her, he will not be pleased at all. There will be more Taylor-related turmoil to deal with in the meanwhile, but Ridge and Brooke will eventually get back together. Ridge Forrester, as he stood at the altar, his gaze fixed not on the ornate stained glass window behind the officiant but on the radiant face of his son, Thomas, who served as his best man, a living, breathing testament to the dynasty he had built and the legacy he was about to formally secure with his marriage to Brooke Logan. This moment, this perfect, gilded apex of his life, felt like the final, beautiful stitch in a tapestry 30 years in the weaving, a tapestry of family, fashion, and formidable success, with the strong, loyal figure of Thomas as its central pillar, the undeniable heir to the Forrester name, the Forrester crest, and the Forrester soul. The ceremony was a symphony of whispered silk and sparkling diamonds, a gathering of Los Angeles elite and family whose shared history was a complex web of betrayals and reconciliations, all momentarily silenced by the profound, simple beauty of the union, and as Ridge reached for Brooke's hand, his heart felt impossibly full, swollen with a pride that was as much paternal as it was romantic, for this was not just about him and Brooke, it was a celebration of their entire messy, magnificent family, finally, blessedly, whole. It was precisely at this zenith of bliss, as the officiant opened his mouth to speak the first sacred words, that a sudden, sharp commotion at the back of the chapel sliced through the sanctity like a shard of glass, and all heads, including Ridge's, turned to see a figure both alien and eerily familiar, a woman, her face a mask of age and anguish that time had not been able to erase entirely, clutching a yellowed manila envelope as if it were both a life raft and a weapon. A collective, confused gasp rippled through the guests, a wave of dissonance in the holy space, but Ridge's blood ran cold not with confusion, but with a primal, terrifying recognition, for this was Sarah, a ghost from a summer buried deep in the annals of his past, a brief, passionate fling during one of his many separations from Taylor that had ended not with a bang but with a vague, awkward whisper, a problem solved with a check and a firm, closed door, a chapter he had assumed was written in disappearing ink. Before ushers could intervene, her voice, cracked and desperate yet piercingly clear, rang out, "I tried to stay away, Ridge. For 30 years, I've carried this. But I can't let you build this future on a lie, not when my son, our son, deserves to know the truth," and her trembling finger, accusatory and definitive, was not pointed at Ridge, but directly at Thomas, whose own face, a moment ago beaming with filial pride, now contorted in bewildered horror. The world seemed to slow to a viscous crawl, the gardenias now smelling of decay, the diamond brilliance feeling like ice, as Sarah thrust the envelope into the hands of a stunned Eric Forrester in the front row, its contents spilling out like poisonous secrets, grainy ultrasound images from a bygone era, a signed confidentiality agreement now morally null and void, and a recent, damning paternity test, its scientific certainty a brutal counterpoint to the emotional truth everyone had accepted. For 3 decades. Ridge's feet were leaden, his body frozen in a tableau of impending ruin, as Eric, his own hand shaking with a violence that betrayed his crumbling world, read the results, his face draining of all color before he looked up, his eyes, those eyes that had always held nothing but unconditional love for his firstborn grandson, now filled with a bottomless pity and shock, and he whispered, a sound that was somehow louder than any scream, "My God, Ridge, the DNA, it's a 0% match. Thomas, he's not yours." The 5 words hung in the air, not just spoken but physically manifest, a wrecking ball of unimaginable force swinging through the very foundations of their existence, shattering the altar, the vows, the family, and the fundamental identity of 2 men at once. Ridge's mind, usually so sharp, so commanding, fractured into 1,000 shards of memory, Thomas's first steps, teaching him to sketch, the pride in his voice when he said "my son," the shared features they supposedly had, all of it now exposed as a cruel trick of perception, a narrative he had built and believed with every fiber of his being because the alternative was unthinkable. He looked at Thomas, truly looked at him, and for the first time, he did not see a reflection of himself or the Forrester jawline, he saw a stranger, a man whose entire life had just been unmade in a single, brutal sentence, and the love in his heart did not vanish, but it twisted into something agonizing and complex, a searing pain laced with a devastating sense of betrayal, not by Thomas, but by fate, by history, by his own youthful carelessness. And Thomas, the rock, the air, the sun, simply broke, his tall frame seeming to shrink, the elegant gray of his bespoke suit suddenly looking like a costume he had no right to wear, as his eyes darted from the devastating paper in his grandfather's hand to the ashen face of the man he had called father every day of his life, searching for a denial that would not and could not come, the very light in his eyes extinguished, replaced by a hollow, yawning void where a lifetime of certainty had once resided. The wedding was over, not postponed, but annihilated, the concept itself now a grotesque joke, and as guests began to shuffle out in a silence heavy with scandalized whispers, the grand ballroom was no longer a venue of celebration but a mausoleum for a truth that had lain dormant for 30 years, its revelation leaving behind a nuclear wasteland of fractured relationships where a father and a son stood on opposite sides of a chasm that had opened without warning, bound no longer by blood, but by the immense, terrifying, and uncertain weight of a love that now had to choose to exist consciously, no longer an innate fact but a fragile, wounded, and conscious decision, the first and most difficult of the rest of their lives. Thomas Forrester's imminent return, a countdown that hangs over the city's glittering skyline like a shroud, forcing every secret, every half-truth, and every carefully constructed facade to the precipice of exposure, and at the very center of this gathering storm is Ridge Forrester, a man perpetually caught in the gravitational pull of 2 suns, now holding an awful secret so profound it threatens to atomize the fragile peace he has fought to build. This secret, born in the sun-drenched, emotionally charged aftermath of Italy, where he played the hero to a vulnerable Brooke Logan, is not merely the physical fact of a kiss or a passionate moment, but the seismic, soul-altering realization that accompanied it, the undeniable, irrevocable truth that his heart, his entire being, belongs not to the woman he is promised to, the brilliant and resilient Taylor Hayes, but to the woman he has left behind, his so-called destiny, Brooke. To Ridge, this epiphany feels less like a choice and more like a fundamental law of his universe being reaffirmed, a brutal and inconvenient truth that he now must desperately conceal, constructing an elaborate performance of contentment for Taylor, who walks in the blissful ignorance of thinking she has finally, fully won her prince after decades of war, unaware that his every touch, every loving word, every plan for their future wedding is a lie woven from a twisted sense of obligation and a cowardly aversion to shattering the happiness he sees in her eyes. His deception is an active, corrosive force, It is not a passive omission but a daily, conscious decision to shove down the torrent of his real feelings for Brooke, to smother the memory of her lips on his and the way saving her reignited a primal protectiveness he only ever feels for her, all because he is trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, believing that the noble, honorable thing to do is to spare Taylor's feelings in the short term, a catastrophic miscalculation that will only magnify the devastation when the foundation of their relationship inevitably crumbles, making him not a hero avoiding pain but an architect of far greater ruin. And Brooke, for her part, is now trapped in her own special hell, forced to bear witness to this charade, knowing with a fierce, intimate certainty that Ridge's heart beats for her, that his soul is tethered to hers, yet having to watch him publicly reaffirm his commitment to Taylor, a silent, agonizing torture that feeds her hope even as it deepens her despair, creating a volatile cocktail of longing and resentment that ensures her quiet acquiescence is only temporary, a dormant volcano, waiting for the slightest tremor to erupt and demand what she now knows is rightfully hers. This entire precarious house of cards is further threatened by the subtle, gnawing suspicions of Deacon Sharp, whose own life is inextricably linked to the chaos of the Forrester-Logan universe, his hard-won street smarts and deep, albeit complicated, knowledge of the players involved, particularly his own wife, the ever-enigmatic and dangerously unpredictable Sheila Sharp, put him in a unique position to sense the shifts in the emotional tectonics, to see the flicker of doubt in Ridge's eye, or the barely concealed yearning in Brooke's, and while his focus may be divided by his own marital mysteries, does Sheila know something? Is she involved in some new, shadowy plot? His peripheral vision is sharp, and his connection to both sides of this divide makes him a potential, albeit unlikely, catalyst or confessor should the walls start to close in on Ridge. Meanwhile, as this foundational betrayal simmers beneath the surface, a new layer of drama is unfolding with Hope Logan and Carter Walton, who are attempting to focus on the bright, hopeful future symbolized by their own wedding plans, a union that represents stability, mutual respect, and a clean break from the toxic patterns of their past, yet their future is poised on a knife's edge, jeopardized not only by the lingering specter of Hope's previous marriage to Thomas and the unresolved trauma it inflicted, but also by the complicating presence of Carter's growing bond with Hope's sister, Steffi, and, more pressingly, the enigmatic and fiercely loyal Daphne Rose, whose connection to Hope could be a source of support or an unforeseen point of conflict, depending on where her true allegiances lie. But all these threads, Ridge's lie, Brooke's pain, Hope's new beginning, Deacon's suspicions, are all pulled taut towards the single, looming event, the return of Thomas Forrester in early September. His homecoming is not merely a character's reappearance, it is the narrative equivalent of a lit match being thrown into a room soaked in gasoline. Thomas, forever the wild card, will arrive with his own updates and his own agenda, and the burning question of his relationship status, is he finally free of the manipulative Paris Buckingham, will send shockwaves through everyone, particularly Hope, for a single Thomas Forrester, especially one who has ostensibly undergone therapy and rehabilitation, is a Thomas unshackled and potentially more dangerous, or perhaps more persuasively charming, than ever before, his freedom instantly resurrecting the ancient, obsessive hope of winning Hope back, not through force now, perhaps, but through a campaign of calculated remorse and reformed devotion, viewing her engagement to Carter not as a permanent obstacle but as a challenge to be overcome. Furthermore, and perhaps most critically for the immediate stability of Ridge's deception, Thomas has always been his mother's most fervent and protective champion, her knight in shining armor who believes wholeheartedly in the mythic Tridge love story. He will return to Los Angeles expecting to see his mother radiant and secure in the arms of the man he believes she is destined to be with, and the moment his artist's eye detects even the faintest shadow of hesitation in his father, the slightest flicker of longing towards Brooke, his entire mission will shift. He will become a detective, a protector, and ultimately, a weapon aimed directly at the heart of Ridge's secret. He will not stand idly by as he perceives Brooke once again manipulating the strings of his father's heart. He will despise the very notion of Ridge waffling back in her direction, and his intervention will be swift, ruthless, and undoubtedly disruptive, likely forcing confrontations and speaking hard truths that Ridge himself is too cowardly to utter, thereby accelerating the entire timeline of the impending explosion. The cruel irony, of course, known to the audience but hidden from the players, is that Ridge and Brooke are indeed destined for another reunion down the road, Their gravitational pull is a fundamental constant of this universe. But the path to that inevitable reunion is paved with the shattered glass of Taylor's heart, a heart that Ridge is currently cradling with lies, and Thomas's return is the event that will ensure that path is not a quiet, gentle transition but a violent, dramatic, and emotionally devastating collapse, ensuring that the awful secret Ridge clutches to his chest will not simply be revealed, but will detonate with maximum force, scarring everyone in its blast radius and setting the stage for the next great war for Ridge Forrester's soul. The countdown, therefore, is not just to a character's arrival, but to the end of an era of false peace and the brutal, glorious beginning of the truth. You're not my birth father. Thomas discovers the biggest secret that Taylor has been hiding for years. Thomas was drowning in it, each breath a gritty labor as he wrestled the heavy, faux iron trunk away from the slope of the roof, his muscles burning with a strain that was a welcome distraction from the low-grade hum of his 20-year-old anxieties. He was up here on a mission of mercy, tasked by Taylor, the man he had called Dad for his entire life, the man who had taught him to throw a spiral, to shave without nicking his Adam's apple, to weather heartbreak with quiet dignity, to find the box of old baby clothes his mother wanted for a friend's shower, a simple, domestic errand that felt like archaeology into his own childhood. The trunk yielded with a groan, its interior a time capsule of yellowed christening gowns and tiny, worn-out sneakers that smelled overwhelmingly of mothballs and memory, but the box wasn't there. Frustrated, he pushed deeper into the eaves, his flashlight beam cutting a wobbly path through the darkness until it glinted off a different container, a simple, unmarked shoebox tucked away in the darkest corner, shoved behind a brittle insulation roll as if it were radioactive. Its very hiding place screamed intention, a stark contrast to the haphazard nostalgia of everything else, and a cold finger of intuition traced a line down Thomas's spine. This was not a box meant to be found. His heart, a moment ago just a reliable pump, suddenly became a palpable thing, a frantic bird beating against the cage of his ribs, as he pulled it into the dim light, the dust on its lid undisturbed for years, a fine gray velvet that coated his fingertips. The first thing he saw was his own face, but not as he knew it, a hospital photo, a newborn red and squalling, swaddled in a standard-issue blanket, and tucked beside it, the official-looking certificate of live birth, the document that had always felt so permanent, so foundational. His eyes scanned it automatically, a lifetime of checking boxes on forms making the action wrote, child, Thomas Edward Ryder. Mother, Eleanor Marie Ryder. His finger slid down to the next line, expecting the familiar, comforting script of father, Taylor James Ryder. But it wasn't there. The name typed in that blank, in stark, bureaucratic black ink, was a word he had never seen in conjunction with himself, a name that belonged to a stranger, to history books, to anyone but him, father, Samuel Joseph Finnegan. The world did not so much shatter as it simply ceased its rotation. The dust motes froze in their lazy dance. The hum of the distant highway vanished. There was only the paper, the name, and the deafening, silent roar of his own blood draining from his head. Finnegan. It was a ghost, a rumor, a man his mother had sometimes mentioned in hushed tones from a life before Taylor, a brief, bad mistake that had ended before Thomas was even a thought. But here he was, stamped and certified, the first man listed on the very first document of Thomas's existence. This had to be a mistake, a cruel clerical error, a nightmare born of attic heat and dust inhalation. With trembling hands that felt like they belonged to someone else, he dug deeper into the box, a desperate archaeologist now unearthing his own ruin. Beneath the birth certificate were letters, tied with a faded ribbon, the handwriting a masculine, slashing script he didn't recognize. He untied the bundle, his breath catching in his throat, and the first line of the top letter leaped out at him, My dearest Ellie, I know you said it's over, but when I think of the child, my child. The word my was underlined so fiercely it had nearly torn the paper. There were photos, too, tucked between the pages, a younger, terrified-looking version of his mother, her face pale and drawn, standing beside a man with dark, intense eyes and a smile that didn't seem to reach them, his hand possessively on her swollen belly. His belly. His child. And then, the final, definitive proof, a later court document, a single sheet that formalized the end of the world. Petition for termination of parental rights, it read, and below, the reason stated coldly. Voluntary relinquishment by biological father, Samuel J. Finnegan. And then, the order that made his vision swim, parental rights and responsibilities are hereby granted to Taylor James Ryder, step-parent of the minor child, Thomas Edward Ryder. Step-parent. The word was a physical blow, a sledgehammer to his sternum. Step-parent. Taylor wasn't his father. He was his stepfather. A legal guardian. A kindly man who had married a woman with another man's baby in her womb. Every memory, every foundational truth of his identity, the stories of his birth that Taylor would tell, the way he'd boast about Thomas having his grandfather's chin, the shared history that was the bedrock of their love, it was all a carefully constructed lie, a beautiful, intricate fresco painted over a rotten wall. The box fell from his numb hands, its contents spilling across the attic floor like the viscera of his former life, and he was moving before he could think, stumbling down the pull-down ladder, his legs weak and uncooperative, the damning certificate clenched in his white-knuckled fist. He found Taylor in the garden, kneeling in the rich soil, his hands black with earth as he tenderly staked a tomato plant, his face a portrait of simple, uncomplicated contentment. The sight of that peace, that normalcy, now felt like the most profound betrayal. Thomas stood there, shaking, the sun unbearably bright, the cheerful chirping of birds an obscene soundtrack to his internal apocalypse. Thomas? Taylor said, his smile fading as he took in his son's ashen face, the wild, unseeing look in his eyes. He started to stand, wiping his hands on his jeans. Son? What is it? What's wrong? The word son was the spark to the tinder. A sound tore from Thomas's throat, a raw, guttural thing that was part sob, part scream. He thrust the crumpled certificate out, his arm trembling violently. What is this? He demanded, his voice cracking under the weight of a pain so vast it felt oceanic. What is this, Taylor? Who is Samuel Finnegan?